and that study was going to be limited to 2 big series in 2009. And I, asked what they were looking for in an editor, in a freelance editor, and they said, they wanted to make sure it read well and that it was accurate, and that I'd sort of be a devil's advocate like editors are. And so I said, okay.
And did they talk about the funding of it, and does that matter?
Well, I knew that, I asked questions, of course. I knew that Krista Cheney and Russ Carollo had both approached the Scientologists about doing freelance work, I gather, after the Scientologists in some way advertised for journalists. I didn't see any of that. And so, of course, I knew they were being paid by the Scientologists to do this study, but they assured me, and later I saw in writing, that if the study got published, it couldn't be altered, not even a comma. In other words, it had to be published contractually. It had to be published as presented to the Scientologists, or, not published at all.
Well, I guess that's the crux of it. So they had complete editorial control, except over the most important decision of all, whether this was actually going to make it to the public or not.
Right. That's an accurate statement.
Investigative journalists now are increasingly not working for newspapers. They're working for all sorts of other, nonprofit and organizations that have agendas. What sort of challenges does that lead to?
Definitely a new landscape. Some of the very best investigative ventures out there right now, like the Center for Public Integrity, which has been around since 1989 and for which I have written, and ProPublica, which is much newer. They get their money from all sorts of individual donors and foundations, and, it's a very different way of doing journalism, and, the masters are different, and the masters are mostly hands-off. But, the funders of ProPublica, this one couple, as I understand it, they didn't make their money in ways that all of us would approve. So, but they also don't exercise any editorial control whatsoever, as far as I know. So it just, there's a lot to think through.
The part that disturbs me a little bit personally as a reporter is it feels like a little bit of a witch hunt. And it seems like, Scientology can hire these guys to try to dig up some dirt on the St. Pete Times, and if they don't find any, then that's never released. That information that, we tried and we didn't see anything. Is that different in some way than other types of investigative journalism that are going on right now?
I was perfectly comfortable with the nature of the investigation, which was critiquing something that appeared in print. I never would have been interested in editing a story or a report that was being used as some kind of weapon by the Scientologists against any journalist.
Is the report finished? Are you allowed to talk about that sort of thing? Have you looked at it yet?
I'm not going to talk about the content. That's up to the reporters who did it. They hired me as their editor, and up to the Scientologists. But yeah, that they finished their work. I did my editing, and it's in the hands of the Scientologists. I noticed in the Howard Kurtz column in the Washington Post that the Scientologist spokesman called it a 20-page report, and that seems about accurate to me. I guess it depends how you paginate it and how you print it out. But it was an in-depth study of newspaper coverage of an institution.
Is there anything about the Kurtz column that you want to comment on, or that you agreed or disagreed with?
Well, he just reported the fact of this study and how it came about. I haven't read it for a couple days, but there was nothing in it that seemed awry.
And do you see? Is there anything new or different about this arrangement, or is this really just a slight twist on what already happens in investigative journalism?
This is unusual. I would presume that not that many organizations that get covered seek and find investigative journalists who will then study the coverage. Maybe that's common and I just don't know it. It's pretty rare in my experience. But, for instance, I wouldn't have been interested in doing the reporting. Partly I don't have the time, and partly, I'm not anywhere near Florida where I could have, had easy in-person access to everybody. And I wouldn't have been interested if the church had approached me. Church, I don't even use that word. The Scientologists had approached me to be involved in any way. But two journalists who had already made this decision to go ahead, who I really respect, asked me if I'd serve as the editor, and for me that wasn't a difficult decision at all.
All right. Well, thanks for talking with us. I really appreciate it. Is there anything that you'd like to add or anything I forgot to ask you?
No, I'm not sure, what the nature of your piece will be. If you think of anything else where you need to fill a gap, call me back. I
appreciate it, Steve. Steve Weinberg, University of Missouri, and long time involved in investigative reporters and editors. Thanks for joining us. And thanks for talking with us. I really appreciate it.